You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, Donald Trump just got rebuked in court, but it was from another judge who he himself appointed. Seems to be a recurring theme here. Can you explain what just happened in court?
Yeah, Brian. So there's another federal court judge in Maryland named Stephanie Gallagher, again, as you say, appointed by Donald Trump, who pushed back hard on the Trump administration, trying to convince her that she should allow somebody to remain in that prison in El Salvador, another Venezuelan immigrant who was wrongfully deported, has shades of, kind of is reminiscent of the Abrego Garcia case, right? This
Right.
one has a little bit of a twist. So this young man's name is Daniel Lozano Camargo. He came to the United States seeking asylum as a 17-year-old unaccompanied minor. And here's the thing. There is a court-approved settlement agreement in 2024 whereby the federal government said it will not deport people who came here as unaccompanied minors who are seeking asylum and their asylum case is sort of underway and progressing. They will not deport them until their asylum case has been decided, has been resolved. And guess what? Daniel Lozano Camargo's case was ongoing. It was pending. It was not resolved. He was protected against deportation under that court-approved settlement agreement and order. But Donald Trump's immigration officials grabbed him up, stuffed him on a plane, and put him in that same prison down in El Salvador. And the judge is none pleased. Here is the procedural posture of it right now, because we just had this development. So the Trump administration came into court with something called an indicative ruling. It sounds suspect. It looked suspect when I looked at it. It's basically a form with some blanks that some immigration officer filled in. And here's what they tried to pull on Judge Gallagher. They said, Judge, look, maybe we shouldn't have deported him. Maybe he didn't enjoy his due process rights. Maybe we did violate this 2024 court-approved settlement agreement where the federal government said it wouldn't do this kind of thing. But look, somebody's filled out this form, and this form says, well, if he did go through his asylum process, he would not be approved for asylum anyway. Can you feel how fishy this kind of an ask is from the Trump administration? And Brian, this is priceless. Let me read for our viewers what Judge Gallagher said in the response of that laughable ask from the Trump administration. She said, the indicative ruling produced by the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services essentially prejudges the outcome of Lozano Camargo's asylum proceedings before they take place. And the judge compared it to a court deciding not to hold a jury trial because the suspect was caught red-handed or confessed. The judge said, quote, it's not a substitute for the process that was due. Process is important. We don't skip to the end and say, we all know how this is going to end up. My order, says the judge, requires that he be returned to this country to get the process. She didn't mince words. She didn't flinch. She didn't back down. And she is telling the Trump administration to facilitate the return of Daniel Lozano Camargo.
Glenn, what do you make of the fact that this is now the second Trump-appointed judge in just the last couple of days who've handed down rulings that run completely counter to either Trump or GOP orthodoxy? We just had Allison Riggs, the North Carolina State Supreme Court justice, go in front of a Trump-appointed judge in a federal district court, and he ruled against all the Republican candidate in that race, Jefferson Griffin's efforts to discard 60-some-odd thousand votes. That was duly shut down by a Trump-appointed judge. Now, just today, we have this Trump-appointed judge pushing back against the administration of the guy who appointed him.
It tells me, Brian, that the black robe can be very liberating because everyone who becomes a federal judge is appointed by either a Republican president or a Democrat president. So they all likely have some sort of, political ideology that drives them, has driven them through life. But let me tell you, Brian, after 30 years of appearing before countless judges, once they don the robe and they have complete independence, and they can never be removed from their position as a judge unless they engage in serious misconduct. It's very liberating. And even the Trump-appointed judges, the vast majority of them seem to be setting aside whatever political, ideology they might have and deciding the case is based on the facts and the law without fear or favor, and certainly without favor to the president who appointed them to the federal bench. And these are fairly easy calls, I would say, as a career prosecutor, when you look at the evidence and the law and the Constitution, which provides due process for every person. It doesn't say for every citizen, for every person. And the Supreme Court has ruled over and over and over again that that includes people who are in the United States of America illegally. And none of these Trump judges seem to be willing to depart from the law or that constitutional principle. So this also suggests to me, Brian, that Donald Trump isn't being straight with the American people when he says that the judges who are ruling against him are lunatic, radical, left-wing judges.
Well, to that exact point, I want to read an excerpt from the ruling that Judge Gallagher handed down, again, a Trump appointee. I don't think that this is a case about whether or not Christian is going to eventually get asylum. Whether he ultimately receives asylum is not the issue. The issue is, and always has been, one of process. And so again, this is going back to this issue of due process, and I find it especially interesting because the issue of immigration more broadly is one where, of course, Donald Trump generally polls better than Democrats, but because he's decided to go so far as to lose the plot here, and really engage in this whole thing where he's usurping all of the power from the courts and deciding to eliminate this whole concept of due process, he is now polling net negative on immigration and net negative 21 points as it relates to the illegal deportation of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. So I find it so interesting that Donald Trump basically took his best issue and squandered it because he's decided to make it a referendum not on legal deportations, but precisely on the opposite, on taking away due process and engaging in these illegal deportations, to the point where even Trump appointees are saying this has nothing to do with asylum. This is about the president just trying to eliminate by fiat the very concept of due process.
Yeah, he's completely squandered the support he had on this issue, because I think we can all agree that the immigration system ought to be reformed. Of course, that's something that Congress has never seemed to have an appetite to take up. But what seems to be more important to the American people, as reflected in those polls, is the rule of law and, a presidential administration that will abide by the Constitution. So, he has completely lost the opportunity to become more popular from the way he handled the immigration issue, and he has made himself far less popular.
Glenn, we are seeing more and more instances where the Trump administration seems to be taking a deport first, ask questions later approach. We've seen that they did it with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. We're seeing it in this particular case right here. Is there any preemptive action that these judges could take, or that anybody could take, so that we don't lose these people who've been illegally deported because Trump then pretends that he can't get them back once they're no longer in the U.S.'s jurisdiction? Or do we constantly just have to be, chasing after the rabbit, so to speak, where we all know Trump is going to continue employing this tack, and that we have to then try to engage in this big, recovery mission after the fact, where we are relying on foreign dictators to be willing to abide by court rulings here in the U.S.?
Yeah, Brian, it's a great question. And there actually has been a significant development in recent days where another judge who happens to be a Trump appointee, a federal court judge out in Texas, Fernando Rodriguez, said, guess what, Trump administration? You can't deport anybody under the Alien Enemies Act. Why? Because it requires that we be at war with Venezuela, or that we be subject to an invasion or an incursion from the Venezuelan military or the Venezuelan government, and we are not. So there actually is at least one federal court order in place that has sort of prospectively told the Trump administration, stop it, you can't do it anymore. Now, it's an open question as to whether the Trump administration will deign to abide by that. I believe they're already appealing it to the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. But the federal courts are trying. And you're right, because there is one judge who actually wrote, I believe, in another case involving the Trump administration, that the administration is acting like the Queen of Hearts in Alice in Wonderland, right? Guilty verdict first and trial later. And that is exactly what they tried to do in the case we are discussing by presenting this indicative ruling. Well, if we did give him his constitutional rights, he would lose. And the judge said, that's not the point. Give him his constitutional rights.
Right. Glenn, what happens next in this particular instance as it relates to this case and this ruling handed down by a Trump-appointed judge?
Well, it was on April 23rd that Judge Gallagher ordered the Trump administration to facilitate the return of Lozano Camargo. And instead, they presented this, Mickey Mouse piece of paper that said, well, he would lose anyway if we did honor his constitutional rights.
Right.
But her order remains in effect, and I don't think we have an update on what the next steps are or when we can expect to see this case back in court. But I have a feeling now that Judge Gallagher has rejected this latest attempt to basically circumvent her order, we're probably going to hear more about this case in the next couple of days.
Okay, well, we will, of course, stay on top of this case, as well as any other cases that relate to this issue of Donald Trump trying to subvert the judicial process and eliminate due process for those who are entitled to it. For those who are watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. It's the best way to support our work and the best way to support independent media more broadly. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.